Tonight, NBC5 investigates one of America's most enduring crime questions. What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? The labor union icon disappeared from a suburban Detroit parking lot 50 years ago today. Our investigative reporter Chuck Goudie has worked on this case since the day it broke and joins us tonight with new details from an old crime mystery.
After 50 years, the beguiling story of Jimmy Hoffa is still best described by his middle name. The R in James R. Hoffa is his mother's maiden name, and it perfectly describes why we are still talking about Hoffa 5 decades after he vanished. Hoffa's middle name is Riddle, and what happened to him remains just that. It is a riddle, though, with fresh clues and answers. Do we know anything more about what happened to him than we did the day he disappeared?
Yes.
Tell me.
I believe that people do know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We know who perpetuated it and how it was done.
In Detroit, at this popular longtime Teamsters Union haunt, reformed mafioso Novi Tocco says he knows what happened to the legendary union boss Jimmy Hoffa. Tocco's bloodline is the Detroit crime syndicate's ruling family, and he is the first-born member of the Motor City mob ever to flip to cooperate with federal authorities. Tocco, once in federal witness protection, says Hoffa's killers are all dead. But here is how he and prominent Hoffa investigators believe it came down on July 30th, 1975. On that hot day in late July 50 years ago, this is where Jimmy Hoffa was last seen alive. He had parked his car in this lot outside a suburban Detroit restaurant. But 50 years ago, there were no security cameras, surveillance photos, and certainly nobody else in the parking lot with camera phones getting ready to take his picture.
He was supposed to meet a major Detroit mobster that day who ensured that he has an alibi for the whole day, and nobody ever has any concrete evidence since then. Bodies, sightings, it was a total evidentiary blackout.
The way former Hoffa task force leader Keith Corbett describes it, the labor icon's disappearance was and is a classic mob rubout.
I think we know who ordered it done, we know who wanted it done, and we have a pretty good idea how they did it.
Ex-federal prosecutor Corbett says they know that Hoffa was to meet here that day with Detroit mob boss Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and New Jersey Teamster and mobster Anthony Tony Provenzano about whether Hoffa might regain union control. But the mob figures stood up Hoffa that day.
He came out and he used the payphone to call his wife to say, nobody's showing up.
But then someone did show, apparently coaxing Hoffa from his Pontiac Granville into their car, where most top investigators believe he was quickly murdered.
He was killed in the car, I'm sure of that.
I believe he died instantaneously or at the moment.
Tocco says mob family members told him Hoffa was quickly beaten to death. Corbett believes he was strangled in the car. Others say he was shot. Regardless of M.O. and despite years of searches in several states, there's never been a trace of his corpse. Mafia experts say that is by design.
People have been running around for a half century on a wild goose chase, looking for something that doesn't exist.
Chicago John Marshall Law graduate Scott Bernstein is founder of the Gangster Report and a leading Hoffa case expert.
You know, if I had to say, like, where was he killed? This is where he was killed.
Bernstein shows NBC5 investigates that home not far from the restaurant parking lot, a house owned at the time by this man, Detroit hoodlum Carlo Licata, who suspiciously was also found dead here 6 years to the day after Hoffa vanished.
This house, known as the House on the Hill, which was his house on the west side of Detroit, was often used as a place where there were sit-downs that would occur between Tony Giacalone and members of the labor movement, specifically Jimmy Hoffa. Detroit had a PhD in gangland murder. Over 100 years of the Detroit Mafia, there have been probably over 100 mob hits. Nobody has ever been convicted.
Hoffa, Detroit's greatest mob hit, officially remains unsolved to this day. Many current and former federal law enforcement officials here in Detroit, as well as current and former members of the Mafia here, say they've concluded over the years that Jimmy Hoffa's body was brought to this site. It used to be a trash processing center that had connections to the Detroit Mafia. Oddly enough, what's here now is a Wayne County, Michigan jail.
And they had those giant compactors to crush like tons of cardboard, just shred them. And people were not worried about DNA evidence back in the time of Hoffa's disappearance. I think he was taken there, shoved to one of those things, and just distributed as waste all over the country. And then shortly after that, the place burns down.
While some investigators believe Hoffa's body was processed here at the old mob-tied Central Sanitation Plant, transformed mobster Novi Toko says Hoffa faced a fishier fate.
I'd say Jimmy Hoffa ended up in seafood.
In seafood?
Not in seafood.
Right.
As seafood.
As seafood. In a barrel, or his body was just disposed of in
not a whole body in pieces.
In a waterway. In the Detroit River?
One of the waterways around here. Was it Lake St. Clair, Lake Huron? I can't be specific. St. Clair River, Detroit River, I don't know.
To use the old Latin phrase from law school, no corpus delicti, there's no proof he's dead. But if you disappear the body, it's a hell of a thing to try to create a case out of that.
Corbett admits that has been incredibly frustrating for the FBI for 50 years. There are investigators who continue working on the Hoffa riddle, insisting his body is still buried somewhere, most notably a mob-connected landfill in New Jersey. But only one explanation can be true, and without proof of which one, 50 years later, it could be any of them.